morning. Good morning.
So we are holding really on base Amud base at the top, right at the second line. But I'm going to go back a few lines just to start from from a new section, right? Which would be 9 lines from the bottom of Daf Chav base Amud Aleph, 9 lines from the bottom of 22a, and in the art scroll it's 22a4. Which starts with the words "V'nechush l'she'ela." This is where we're going to reference the whole discussion between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel with regards to the story with the guy who has a house and it has 2 floors, and we use the earthenware vessel, to stop up the hole, that skylight, to prevent the tumor from going through. And the purpose of bringing that whole discussion is to show that we do have people who are considered to be a chaver. That means people who are careful and familiar with the laws of Tumah Tahara, borrowing vessels from a person who is an Amoritz, meaning he is not familiar with the laws and is not careful with the laws of Tumah Tahara. That being the case, the issue we're trying to address is, why are we okay with a chaver immersing his vessel inside of another vessel if an Amoritz will watch him and do the same, although we might not accept the truma? That's what we answered before, that we're not going to accept the truma, so we don't have to worry about it. But nevertheless, we might have a chaver who's going to be borrowing this vessel to use it for his own truma. So why isn't that a concern? And therefore, why wouldn't the Mishnah come along and say you shouldn't do it for Kodesh, neither should you do it for Truma? And we're going to answer that question. But first, we're bringing this whole discussion to show that there is a concern about a chaver borrowing a vessel from an Am Haaretz. Okay. Not sure whether I should give it another minute or should just get started. I think because we're doing Chazara, we're doing a review, so we'll just start, and when other people join, hopefully it won't be too confusing because they've already learned it yesterday. Okay, Daf Chav Beis Amud Aleph, again, 9 lines from the bottom. V'nechush l'she'ela, asks the Gemara, let us be concerned for the possibility of a chaver borrowing a vessel from the Amoretz, and so therefore we might come to have a person using a vessel that was not properly immersed. It's none, as we've learned in the Mishnah. It says, Kli cheres, when it comes to an earthenware vessel, matzil ala koil, it protects all substances from becoming tumah, as we already explained that the earthenware vessel has a very special law with regards to the outside of it, that the outside does not contract tumah, it's only the inside that contracts tumah, which means if a rishon tumah or avatuma would touch that vessel on the outside, it wouldn't become tamei. It's only if that avatuma would touch it on the inside, would enter its airspace, so to speak, that's when it would become tamei. So, because of that, it can serve as a chatzitza, an interposition, to prevent anything that's inside it from becoming tamei. So that's the different Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says that it protects everything. Everything that's inside it is protected. Beis Shammai says, the only things that it really protects is the food, the drink, and and for the earthenware vessels. If there are other earthenware vessels inside of it, then it serves as a protection. But not those vessels which are non-earthenware. Those things will not be protected by this particular vessel. So now, want to understand what's the difference between the food, the drink, and the earthenware vessels and the non-earthenware vessels. Why are you making that distinction? So Amalehem Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel turned around to Beis Shammai and says, Mipnei ma, why do you make this distinction? Amru Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai responded and said, Because the earthenware vessel that you want to protect all the others, it is tamei because it belongs to an am haaretz. And since it is already tamei, because we're going to assume the default position for all the earthenware vessels of an am haaretz, they're going to be tamei because you cannot make them kosher, you cannot make them pure. And Beis Shammai is explaining to Beis Hillel that we have this principle that although an earthenware vessel can protect all the things that are inside it, that only works when the earthenware vessel is tahor. But if the earthenware vessel is tamei, and that's our assumption with regards to the am haaretz, so therefore everything inside it is not going to be tahor. It's not going to work. It's not going to serve as a protection. If that's the case, so Beis Hillel turns back to him and says, 1 second. You just declared the foods and the beverages in this earthenware to be tahor. But 1 second, didn't you just say that because the earthenware vessel of the am haaretz, because it is tamei, the whole thing doesn't protect anything inside it. So why are you telling me that the food and the drink are okay? Amru lahem Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai answered, when we declared that the food and the beverages are tahor, who are we saying that for? We were saying it we came and we purified it. We said that it still will remain pure for the am haaretz. Here we went over to Daf Chaf Beis Amud Beis 22b. We're saying for him, for that am haaretz, aval netayres akli. If I were to come along and say that a non-earthenware vessel is now also going to be protected by this vessel, now this tahara is something that pertains not just to the am haaretz, but also to you. And therefore, we made this distinction because we're concerned that you might come to borrow this vessel, this non-earthenware vessel, from an am haaretz, and therefore we're saying with regards to vessels, they are borrowed by a chaver, and therefore the question remains: why is it that we're not concerned about immersing one vessel inside of another vessel when it comes to truma? Okay. So now, Tanya was taught in the Brisa about this particular ruling of Beis Shammai. Omar Rabbi Yeshua, when Rabbi Yeshua heard this halacha, he said, I'm ashamed of your words, Beis Shammai. Why? Because if I take your principle and your rule now, the scenario that he's about to paint makes no sense. What's the scenario? Is it possible that you're going to have a woman who's on the second floor? Okay, so there's a corpse on the lower floor, and there's a woman that is kneading dough on the upper floor. Okay, so now what happens over here? You stick in this earthenware vessel to prevent it from going up, and what are we going to say? We're going to say, according to Beis Shammai, that Isha v'areva, the woman and the trough that she's using in order to knead those things, are tamei and shiva. They're going to be tamei for 7 days. Uvatzek, but the food, right, meaning the dough, is tar. Lugin, male mashkin, another scenario. You're going to have the same situation. The lower level has a corpse. The upper level has let's not say an upper level. Let's say even in the lower.
Hi. Yes.
Okay, that's right.
I'm good.
Even the lower level, if you have this earthenware vessel, right, and it has this flask, an earthenware flask, is going to be lugin mali mashkin. It's going to be full of beverages, right? Now, lugin tamei to shiva. The flask, you're saying, is going to be tamei a tumah of 7 days, or mashkin tahirin, and yet the beverage inside of it is going to be tar. That whole scenario just does not make any logical sense. Yeah, do you understand? Because this differentiation sounds very arbitrary, right? Like the woman's going to be tamei, the trough's going to be tamei, but the dough's going to be going to be tar. The flask is going to be tamei, but the wine inside of it is going to be tar. Such a halacha doesn't make sense, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua says your halacha is something that I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed by your words, Beis Shammai. What happened was, after he said all of this, at some point, nitpal loy talmid mitalmidei Beis Shammai, a certain disciple of Beis Shammai engaged Rabbi Yeshua. Amalai, he says to him, if you allow me, I'm going to tell you the reasoning for Beis Shammai's halacha. Amalai Amar. So he said to him, please tell me. So he says to him, Amalai, he said to him, Kli tamei chaitzitz or eina chaitzitz. Tell me something. Does a kli tamei, an impure vessel, does it serve as an interposition to prevent the tumah going up, or does it not? Amalai, he says, it doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't. It serves as an interposition, and so therefore the tumah keeps going. So now he continues with his line of reasoning. Kli shel am haaretz tamei otar, a earthenware vessel that belongs to an am haaretz. Is it tamei or tar? Amalai tamei. He said it's tamei. Now, if you're going to tell this am haaretz that his vessel is tamei, he's not going to listen to you. Not only is he not going to listen to you, if you're going to come along and tell him that your vessels are tamei, you know what's going to happen? He's going to get back and say to you, you're saying mine is tamei. I'll tell you something. Mine is tar and yours is tamei. Okay? I.e., who do you think you are? Right? I don't need you to come along and to tell me that my stuff is tamei. So therefore, because of that, we need to be very careful with the way we talk to the am haaretz, and we need to be very careful with the kind of restrictions and rules that we try to impose upon the am haaretz. So, this is the very reason of Beis Shammai coming along and making these distinctions. What does that mean? What it means is like this. If I'm going to come along and say, you have a lower level and you have a higher level, and there's the keli of the am haaretz over there, and it's trying to make a separation between the lower level and the higher level to stop the tumah from going up. Why? Because I guess for this am haaretz, the avi avois hatumah, the highest level of tumah, the tmei mace, a corpse, the impurity that gives off by a corpse, and even am haaretz is aware of it and wants to try to be careful. So he's trying to be careful. He puts his vessel in to stop it from spreading. Now, Beis Shammai says, if I'm going to tell him, funny joke, none of it works, what are you doing? He's going to be very offended. And what you're telling me now is that all my vessels and all my food and everything is tamei. And because of that, he's going to not only not listen, but he's going to become upset and turn around and say, your things aren't kosher, mine are kosher, meaning yours aren't tahor, mine are tahor. So therefore, what Beis Shammai says is, let's see what we could save over here. You know what we could save? We could save the things that are salvageable. What do I mean by salvageable? An earthenware vessel, there's no way to purify it. The food, it's too late. It's going to have to go to the garbage, right? So therefore, if I'm going to tell him it's tamei, he's not going to listen to me. But if I tell him that it's tahor, I tell him you can eat it, you can have the vessels, you can have everything. Just the non-earthenware vessels, those are problematic, and therefore they need to still go to the mikvah. So then the am haaretz, he'll listen to me. he'll accept what I'm saying to him. So this Talmud of Beis Shammai is explaining to Rabbi Yeshua, there's some logic behind the reasoning of Beis Shammai. It's true, it sounds strange that you have a woman kneading dough and the woman becomes tamei. Why does she become tamei? Because the earthenware didn't really protect. And when the keli in which she was kneading it also becomes tamei, because that's a non-earthenware vessel, so it can become tar. So that's also going to become tamei, right? We're going to say it's tamei, and yet we're going to say that the dough isn't tamei. You know why? Because we want the Amaretz to accept it. But who are we saying that it is not tamei for? Not for the chaver, but just for the Amaretz. When Rabbi Yeshua heard this, miyad halach Rabbi Yeshua, so straight away Rabbi Yeshua went, v'nishtateach al kivrei Beis Shammai, he prostrated himself on the graves of Beis Shammai, and Omar, he said, na'anesi lachem asmis Beis Shammai. He said, I've spoken excessively against you, bones of Beis Shammai. And then he goes on to say, Oma stuma shelchem kach. If your cryptic rulings, which didn't make sense on the surface, are now shown to be so logical, how much more so the ones whose reasoning is readily explained? They're very lofty and very, very good. Amru, they said about Rabbi Yeshua, who was so remorseful that he spoke excessively against Beis Shammai, they said that Kol Yomov, his whole day, all of his days, Hushkru Shinov Yosef, his teeth were blackened because of the fasting. He realized that what he had done was a grave mistake. And here's a Hashgacha Pratis, because this week's Parsha is Parshas Tazria and Mitzayra, where it talks about how careful we have to be with regards to how we speak about other people. And here we see that Rabbi Yeshua, when he spoke, and here we're talking about somebody who wasn't just speaking negatively about somebody else for no reason. Here he was in the midst of learning and trying to understand Torah. He expressed himself in a bit of a zealous way, and as a result, he took upon himself to fast because he realized what a mistake it was to speak against Beis Shammai in that manner. All right, what is the bottom line? Why did we bring all of this? Says the Gemara, Kitanim mihas l'chav. What did we ultimately state at any rate? The Mishnah says that what? That Beis Shammai said to Beis Hillel that when we came along, and if we're going to make the non-earthenware vessel to be tar, I'm going to be affecting that for him and for you. The food in the earthenware vessel, it's just for him. You're never going to touch that anyway. But the vessel, it will be not just for him, but it'll also be for you. What do we see from this? Alma, we see Sha'alina Minayu, that we borrow vessels from an Am Haaretz. Therefore, why is the Mishnah not concerned with regards to a Chaver immersing his vessel into another vessel for Truma, and the Am Haaretz following his example and then not immersing his vessel properly? And that serves as a problem for the Chaver who's going to borrow the vessel. And for the Gemara, answers the Gemara, it's not a problem. You know why? Because when we borrow the vessel from them, we're going to immerse it ourselves. So we borrow the vessel, and even if the non-earthenware vessel was taken and immersed in an inappropriate manner, meaning he put it inside another vessel because he saw the chaver doing that, and he wasn't careful about the chatzitza, nevertheless, it's not a problem because we're going to take that vessel anyway, and we're going to immerse it again, and we're going to do it properly again. Okay? Says the Gemara, if that's really the case, that we borrow from the Amaretz, and before we use it, we immerse it, so then this is something that Beis Hillel should have responded to Beis Shammai. Nihadralu Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, then let Beis Hillel respond to Beis Shammai in the Mishnah and say, Kishalina Minayu Matalina Lahu, that when we borrow the vessel, we're going to immerse it. In other words, you, Beis Shammai, came along and said that you're going to make the food, the drink, and the earthenware vessels tamei. but you're not going to make the non-earthenware vessel tamei, right? Why? Because it's going to be a concern for us. Beis Hillel should have turned around and said, what concern for us? We're going to immerse it in the mikveh anyway. So you can make all of it tamei. Don't make any distinctions. Make it all tamei, or make it all tahar, whichever way you want. You can make it all tahar if you want. You can make the food, the drink, the vessels. You can make everything tahar. But we know that we're taking it from an amaretz. We're going to immerse it in the mikveh anyway. So why are you making this distinction? Very interesting answer. He says, because we have a particular halacha when it comes to tmei meis. When you contract tumah from a corpse, what did we say? The woman, we said, and the vessel is going to be at what kind of tumah? Tumas shiva. She's going to become impure for 7 days. And so too the vessel becomes tamei for 7 days. And there's a particular process that you have to go through in order to remove that impurity of the corpse impurity. And what's that? You need to get the sprinkling of the para aduma. And the sprinkling of the para aduma is one that is a 7-day process. It's after the 3rd day you go to get sprinkled, and then again after the 7th day you go to get sprinkled. So now, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're fine.
It just said that I was signed out. Okay, sorry about that. So now here's the thing. 1 second. If Beis Shammai were to come along and tell the guy that it's all tahar, or if he would come along and upset him by telling him that it's all tamei, then the things that we would trust the Amoris about, and that is with regards to tmei meis, the impurity contracted from a corpse, where we wouldn't be able to trust him anymore. Why? Because either he's been misled to believe that he doesn't have to immerse it in the mikveh anymore, or he's upset with us and we can't trust him at all, right? Does that make sense? What I'm saying is like this. Let's do it inside. We'll see. It's going to come clear inside. Let's do it inside. Says the Gemara, the reason why Beis Hillel didn't respond and say that we're going to borrow it and we're going to immerse it in the mikvah is because it's not going to work for one particular case. And what's that? Tmei meis, when it comes to a tamei that comes through a corpse, is boi hazor, it needs sprinkling shlishi or shvi on the 3rd and on the 7th. Now, umana l'shvi yaimer l'moshli inche, and generally speaking, people do not lend vessels for a long period of 7 days, which means to say as follows: if I want to be able to borrow something from my friend who's an Amharetz, and I say, hey, can I borrow your vessel? If he's not aware that this non-earthenware vessel has become tamei through tmei meis, then he might lend it to me, right? And I may go just take it to the mikvah and immerse it in the mikvah, thinking that it hasn't come into contact with any tmei meis, because otherwise the Amaris would have told me, because he's going to be careful about that. So he was told by the rabbis that there's no problem. Right? So he came along and told me there's no problem. I say, okay, he says no problem. I'm just going to put it in the mikvah. But the truth is, me putting it in the mikvah doesn't help. Why doesn't it help? Because when I put it in the mikvah, because I need to have the sprinkling of the para aduma, right? Because here there was a tmei meis. Therefore, Beis Hillel didn't come back and say to Beis Shammai, we'll just borrow it and you could tell him whatever we'll just borrow it and immerse it in the mikvah and you could tell him whatever you want, is because Beis Hillel understood that the reason of Beis Shammai. Now, beg the Gemara, 1 second, are you telling me that the Amoretz are not believed in regards to immersion? Right? Well, Tanya, didn't we teach in a brisa that what? That nemonim Amoretz al taharas tevilas meis. That an Amoretz, they are believed with respect to the tahara by immersion, of which of that which is tamei on account of a corpse. So we do believe them with regards to Tumas. So why are you telling me that we wouldn't believe them? Abaya says, "Lo kasha." This is not a question. Why? Ha bagufa. This brisa that says an am haaretz is believed refers to the tara of his body, right? So we believe that the am haaretz, when he comes into contact with a dead person, right, then he will make sure to go and immerse himself in the mikvah, and we can trust him. But no, it's not even in the mikvah. We trust that he's going to go and do the whole process of the paraduma properly, so we trust him. But in the brisa where we said, well, sorry, in the when the Gemara says that an am haaretz is not believed, this refers to the tahara of his vessel, the status of his vessels, whether they are pure or impure, that we won't accept, and therefore it's not a contradiction. Rava says, no, there's a different answer, right? It's not that one place in the brisa is talking about his body, and here we're talking about his vessels. Rather, in both cases, we're talking about his vessels, right? And in one case we say we believe, and one case we don't. We say we don't believe. But like Hashem, it's not difficult. Why? In the case where we believe him, it's because he said, he comes along and he says, here is a vessel that I immersed, and it was not one vessel inside of another vessel. So basically what he's saying is, I didn't even enter into an area that is questionable. I just put it straight in and I did it properly. And here, in the case where we say we don't believe him, is he says that I put it in to another vessel, and I immersed it inside of another vessel, but I made sure that the opening was at least the size of Shrifer Sanoid. Here already, you're getting into a questionable area, and we don't trust him to be able to be that knowledgeable and that careful and scrupulous to be able to determine that he went into an area which is questionable and he came out without making a mistake. So therefore, we have no real contradiction. One was with the case where he says, I just put it in it on its own. It didn't go into another vessel. And here he's saying it went into another vessel, but I made sure that the opening was big enough. Frank, the Gemara, Vahatanya. Vahatanya, this is not a question, but this is a supporting statement. Vahatanya was taught in the Brisa, Nam and Am Haaretz, and Am Haaretz is believed, Lema to say, Peris loy huksharu, that the fruits have not been prepared to become susceptible to Tumah. In other words, if a person comes along and says that these foods have always been dry, they never came into contact with any kinds of liquids that would make it susceptible to be tumah, we accept him. We accept his testimony. We believe him, right? So we see that there's a distinction between whether a person says they never became susceptible to tumah, and a person coming along and saying, look, they did become susceptible to tumah, but I made sure that no tumah came into contact with them. Then we don't believe him anymore. But if he said that he never had any problems to begin with because it never got into a state where it could be susceptible to tumah, we believe him. Likewise, in our case, if he said that he immersed it without putting it into another vessel, we believe him. If he says he put it into another vessel, but there was no problem, then we don't believe him. Okay, now, all good? Everybody still following?
I'm not borrowing pots from Amaratzin anymore.
Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I see I'm trying to conceptualize. So basically, it's trying to get the Am Haaretz more involved, but the Haver is still questioning everything, but he doesn't want the Am Haaretz really to understand this, but he still wants the Am Haaretz involved in the process, basically. It seems like this is what the whole picture is about, basically.
Well, yes, it's not so much about involving him in the process. It's basically, we need to have clear boundaries. We need to know where we do believe him and where we don't believe him. And in the places that we do believe him, right, we need to make sure that we can continue to believe him without upsetting him, without entering into questionable areas where we're not going to be sure as to whether he's telling us the information that we need to know. So we say, with regards to Truma, we're just not going to accept anything he says, and that's fine. And we'll tell him that he can eat it, and that's fine. No problem. Everything is fine, right? However, not that he can eat the truma, but we're saying his vessels are fine and his and all of his other things are fine. We're just not going to use them without putting them into the mikvah. However, when it comes to tmei mace, when it comes to a impurity that comes from the corpse, there we say that we do believe the Am Haaretz. We do believe him. We think that it is severe enough for him to take extra care when it comes to tmei mace, both with himself, with immersing, with doing the proper procedures for himself to become tahar, right? And also for his vessels, which means to say that if there was a case where his vessels were in the same house as a dead person, even if he tried to block up the hole, he will tell us, because we've told him to tell us, the non-earthenware vessels became tamei. And that's something that we want to believe him, so that we know that we cannot borrow that vessel. That we know that we cannot borrow that vessel. Why can't we borrow that vessel? Because people don't usually lend it out for 7 days, and I would need to borrow it for at least 7 days to be able to purify it so that I could use it. So therefore, it's going to be very helpful if I am going to borrow from a Am Haaretz to have him tell me the truth about the status of his non-earthenware vessel, so that I can be aware, and either I can go with him and purify it together with him, or I can say I need to borrow it for 2 weeks and then go and do it myself. Okay. Now we mentioned above that what? An Am Haaretz is believed to say that he immersed his own body properly. So the Gemara asks, is it true that he's really believed concerning the tahara of his own body? Well, Tanya, did we not learn in a brisa that chaver shabola hazais, if you have a chaver who shows up at the Beis Hamikdash and says, I want to be sprinkled with the ashes of the parah aduma, right, with the water, with the mixture of the parah aduma, what's the halacha? Mazid olav miyad. We can come along and sprinkle on him immediately. Now, it's important to remember, when do we sprinkle? When do we sprinkle on the person who's impure? Only on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. So when he comes and he tells us, I would like to be sprinkled, we assume that he knows when he became tamei, and he's counted properly the 3 days, and when he comes on the 3rd day, we don't ask him any questions because he's a chaver. However, Am Haaretz shabola hazais, but what happens if an Am Haaretz comes along and he says, I became impure by touching a corpse or coming into contact somehow, and therefore I want to be purified, and today's my 3rd day? What do we say to him? We do not sprinkle upon him until we see him in our presence counting 1st day, 2nd day, 3rd day, and then another 4 days until the 7th day. But we won't sprinkle on him the 1st day, because we're not sure whether we can trust him to be doing the process properly. So you said to me, we trust the Am Haaretz with regards to his own immersion, but here it seems that we don't trust him, because we see the chaver we trust straight away, and we sprinkle him on the 3rd day immediately. As soon as he comes, the other guy, we don't trust him, and we have to have him stand there in front of us. So the Gemara says it's not a problem. On the contrary, this is exactly why the statement we made before, that we trust the guy about his actual immersion, is true. So Abaya says, because of the severity with which you were severe with him in the beginning, by not believing him about it being his third day and making him wait the first 3 days. Hey, Kalta Olav B'Seifai, you've made it lighter for him at the end, meaning to say that once he goes through the process and he immerses himself in the mikvah, if he comes along and says, I immersed myself in the mikvah, we believe him. Why? Because he's been put through the ringer. Right? He realizes he has to make sure that this is done properly. This is no joke. It's no laughing matter. And therefore, he's going to do it properly. So when he testifies about himself that his immersion was done properly, we're going to believe him. Okay, and that's the end of this piece of Gemara, the shtickle. Okay, so far so good. Everybody still with me? Okay, there's the Gemara further. The second case of the Mishnah says that one of the things that we were extra stringent with regards to Kodesh and not with Truma is with regards to different sections of a particular vessel, right? You have the outside and the inside and the handle, right? That with regards to these things, if they contract a rabbinic Tuma, then only the outside or the handle, or whatever it might be, needs to be purified, not the other parts. So says the Gemara, what does this mean when you say the outside and the inside? So the Gemara says, it's kiditznan, as we learned in the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, kli shenitma acharav b'mashkin. If a vessel's outside contracted tuma through coming into contact with tamei liquids. Now, it's important to understand that this is not possible when you're talking about biblical tumah. Why? Because biblical tumah, the rule is that eichlin and mashkin cannot make a keli tamei. It's only a rishon l'tumah, an avatumah, that can make a vessel impure, right? So therefore, when we talk about food and drink that make a vessel impure, is talking about a rabbinic tumah. So we say, with regards to that, if the outside, right, of the vessel came into contact with mashkin, like liquids that were tamei, the outside is tamei, but toichai, oignai, oznai, v'yadav tahirin, but its inside, its rim, its ear, and its handles are all tar. Now, nitma toichai, but if the inside contracted tumah, then we say kulei tamei, then its entirety becomes tamei. So that's what the Mishnah means about when we say that the outside and the inside and the tzvita are considered to be separate vessels for truma, not for kodesh though, because when it comes to kodesh, we say we're going to consider the whole vessel as one, and therefore, if any part of it becomes tamei, then the whole thing is considered to be tamei. Now, Mishnah said, "Obeis hatzvita." What is the beis hatzvita, the tzvita place? What is that referring to? Says the Gemara, my beis tzvita. What is the beis tzvita? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Shmuel. Makim shetzovtoi. It's a place by which one hands it to the other. So like the handle. Similarly, it says in the pasuk, "Vayitzbot lo yikoli." He handed her this roasted grain, this parched grain, and so we see that the vayitzbot over here means to pass. So it's like a handle with which you pass things. Rav Asi Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Rav Asi says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan that no, what this place is, what this part is makim sheniki adas tzevin. It's a place in which the delicate individuals dip the food. In other words, in those days, because vessels were hard to come by, so therefore people used some vessels for different functions. So sometimes if you're going to eat food and you want to dip it into some condiment or whatever it might be, right? It's a mustard. So where would they put the mustard? So they would put the mustards maybe in their cups, in their wine cups, and then just wipe it out and then drink wine once they're done. However, there were people who were very particular, very delicate souls, and they would be like, "No, I don't want to use my cup that I'm going to drink my wine with to put in mustard or anything else." So therefore, they would have on their plate a special area that they would use to put these dips in. So that's what the Beis HaTzvita is. Okay. Tanya Rav Bibi, Kamei Rav Nachman. So here's a related brisa about Reb Bibi, who taught the following brisa in the presence of Reb Nachman. He said as follows. Here's the brisa. It says, Kol hakelim ein lehem acharayim v'toich. All vessels have no distinction between their outside and their inside. Okay? All vessels have no distinction between the inside and the outside. Echad kodshei hamikdash, whether it's regards to holy things of the temple, ve'echad kodshei hagvul, and also those things which are considered holy of the borders. What does that mean? That means like this. Our Mishnah said what? That when it comes to Kodesh, then there's a difference between all these different places. But when it comes to Truma, by Truma, there's no difference by all these different parts of the vessel. But when it comes to Kodesh, there is a difference. This teaching that Rav Bibi is saying in the presence of Rabbi Nachman says that the same halacha, that what? That all the different parts are considered to be one when it comes to the Kodesh of the Mikdash, meaning the holy things of the Mikdash, like sacrifices and so on. But then he goes on to say that this is true both with Kodshei HaMikdash and Kodshei HaGvul. So now we want to know, what is Kodshei HaGvul? Amalei, so Rav Nachman said to Rav Bibi, Kodshei HaGvul Magninu. What does it mean, the holy things of the borders? Remember, sacrifices had to be eaten usually in the Beis HaMikdash. That's considered to be in the Gvul, right? Well, in the Mikdash. So what does Kodshei HaGvul mean? That you can eat it in the borders. So are you trying to tell me that it's Truma? It can't be, because we've learned in our Mishnah that we mentioned over here, that these different parts of the vessel have distinctions when it comes to Truma. So obviously, when you're quoting this brisa, it can't be contradicting the Mishnah. Well, it could be technically, but it doesn't make sense to say that it's contradicting the Mishnah. So therefore, what does Kodshei HaGvul mean? So Dilma, perhaps, L'chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh. Maybe what it means is it's not talking about Truma, but it's talking about the non-consecrated food that was prepared with the level of purity of Kodesh. And in that case, then the rule that all these different parts of the vessel are considered as one would apply to them as well. Kamrit. Yeah, so that's what you're saying. So once you've mentioned this, ad kartan milsa the Omar Rav Bar Avua, you've now reminded me of the following statement that was made by Rabba Bar Avua. What did he say with regards to our Mishnah? He says, Achas Esrei Mailis Shanukan, we're taught over here 11 heightened standards that were decreed for Kodesh but not for Truma. Sheish Rishonis, the first 6, Ben Kodesh L'chulin, that these rules will apply, these stringencies will apply both to things that are kodesh and to non-consecrated food that were made with the same kind of stringencies as kodesh, and achreinais lekodesh. But the last 5 stringencies that we read about in the Mishnah are only applied to Kodesh, but not to Chulin that were prepared according to the Torah standard of Kodesh. Okay, that's the end of this shtickle. Now the Gemara is going to discuss the third Milo, it's called, the heightened standard that we listed in the Mishnah that we apply to Kodesh and not to Truma. What's that? It says like this: Hanoises hamidras. Noises Truma. Somebody who's carrying a midras can also at the same time carry Truma. What does that mean? What is a midras? A midras is anything that was stood upon or sat upon by someone who's a Rishon L'Tumah. Okay? So if you have a Zav or a Zava or a Nida that wore a shoe or sat on some clothing, that thing now becomes a midras. So now we're saying that a person can carry this shoe, right? And that is still okay while he's carrying an earthenware barrel, let's say, of Truma wine, right? Why? Because remember, the earthenware vessel is not going to become tamei on the outside, right? it's only on the inside. And since he's just touching the barrel on the outside, we say it's okay. Avaloi es hakodesh, but that's not okay with kodesh. We will not allow him to hold this shoe of a midras while he's carrying a barrel of wine that's kodesh. Frank the Gemara, kodesh, my time alloy. What is the reason that you cannot do it for kodesh? Because think about it for a minute. One shouldn't be able to do it for truma as well. The reason why you're going to allow it for truma is because you don't think it's such a big problem. If you don't think it's such a big problem, so why can't you do it for kodesh? Says the Gemara, mishum ma'aser shaya. The reason why the rabbis enacted this as special decree is because of an incident that once occurred, and it occurred with kodesh. The Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Yehuda said in the name of Reb Shmuel, there was a story about a guy who was transporting a barrel of consecrated wine from one place to another. And here we go over to Daf Gimel Amud Aleph. And the strap of his sandal broke off. Now, what did he do? On a tala, and he took it and he placed it on top of the barrel. Why? Because he needs to free up his hand to be able to carry it. So he took the sandal and he put it on top of the barrel. And what happened? And it fell into the airspace of the barrel, and therefore it contracted tumah. So when they saw that happen, they decided this is a sign that we need to be more careful, right? This should never have happened. And so therefore, that time they stood up and they, Shah Amru, they said, one who's carrying a midras can simultaneously carry truma, but not kodesh, because of this incident that happened. Right? The Gemara, if this incident took place and you made a decree with regard to kodesh, trumanami, why don't you apply the same thing, the same restriction to truma as well? And for the Gemara, Mani, who's the Tana of this Mishnah? The Tana of this Mishnah that restricts with the decree only in the exact same instance that happened, the exact same circumstance, is Reb Chanani ben Akavya. It's Reb Chanani ben Akavya. The Omar, Reb Chanani ben Akavya said, like Osru el biyardin ubisfina. There was a story, as the Gemara is going to tell us momentarily, and the rabbis, because of that incident, made a decree with regards to transporting things, and they said that the decree is only in a case where it was with the Yarden and with a boat. That was the opinion of Reb Chananya ben Akavya. And that is exactly how the incident took place. In other words, anytime the rabbis made a decree because of a particular incident that happened due to circumstances, that new decree will only apply in similar circumstances, but not in other circumstances. Maihi, what was the story? What was the story upon which Reb Chananya ben Akavya said the statement? The Tanya was told in the Brisa, and here we have the story. It says in the Brisa, like Yisa Adam mechatos ve'efer chatos, person should not take chatos water or chatos ashes, v'yavirem b'yarden, and transport them across the Jordan, uvesfina, and in a boat. Okay, why not? Because, one second, v'lo yamed b'tzad zeh, and not only should you not transport it across the Jordan in a boat, you should also not stand on one side and throw them across to the other side. You should not float them across the water. Neither should he ride upon an animal or upon his friend to transport this ashes. Unless his feet were touching the ground. However, he can bring them over a bridge, and he doesn't need to be concerned that he would be violating this decree. This rule applies not only for the Jordan River, it also applies to all the other rivers as well. That is the opinion of the first Tana of this brisa. Reb Chananya ben Akavia says in this brisa, he disagrees. He doesn't say that this new decree would apply, not transporting it in any way, shape, or form, unless you have 2 feet on the ground, and so on. He says it's only with regards to the Jordan, and it's only with a boat. And it's because it was like the circumstances of a story that occurred. What was the story that happened? He said, story like this. Rav said the name of Rav. There was a story with one guy. He was transporting the waters of the paraduma, and the ashes of this chatos, of this paraduma, Yarden in the Jordan of Bastvina, and he was in a boat. Now, he found an olive-sized piece of a human corpse lodged into the floor of the boat. But I say, one second. And it seems, I think, one second, I just want to see something. No. All right. Somehow, what happened was this person came into contact with this tumah, and thereby he made the ashes no longer usable, which was a terrible thing. So at that time, the rabbi said, Lo yisa adam mechatos ve'efer chatos. A person should not take the chatos water and the chatos ashes and transport them across the Jordan in a boat. But what we see from this incident is that when the rabbis made a decree, they only made a decree in the same circumstances. And that's the answer to your question as to why the rabbis only made this extra stringency with regards to Kodesh and not with Truma. Says the Gemara, they asked with regards to this halacha about not carrying a sandal, right? That is a midras, right? Not to carry a shoe that is a midras, right? While you're carrying this Kodesh. He says, sandal tome, you mentioned with regards to a shoe that was a midras, right? But what is the halacha with sandal tar? Sandal tar mao. Am I allowed to carry a shoe that is tar? What's the logic in not being able to? Well, I might say to you, because the rabbis want to be really careful with Kodesh, because of an incident that happened, if I'm going to allow you to walk and carry a barrel in one hand and carry a tar shoe in another hand, you may come to, at some point, carry a non-tar shoe at some point. And because I want to avoid it, maybe we should enact a special decree that not only can you not carry a shoe that is a midras, you shouldn't carry any shoe, even a tar one, so that you never come to this problem. So there's no answer to that question. What we spoke about in our Mishnah was with regards to carrying an open barrel of Kodesh. So we want to know, what's the law with regards to carrying a midras shoe together with a closed barrel of Kodesh? Would that be allowed or would that not be allowed? Do we say, although it's closed, and therefore there's no way the shoe could ever enter into the airspace because it's closed, right? Or do we say, because we had an instance where when it was open, something fell in, if I allow you now to take a closed one, you might come to, at some point, carry an open one. We don't answer that question. Third question is, Ovar v'nosa mahu. What happens if person went and he transgressed and he carried the midras together with a barrel of Kodesh, making sure that they don't come into contact with another, does the barrel of Kodesh automatically become Tameh or not? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Ilah says, with regards to this last case, Rabbi Ilah says, Im Ava Manasa, if he went and he transgressed and he carried the midrash together with the barrel of Kodesh, Tameh, it becomes Tameh. Rabbi Zera says, Avar Manasa, if he transgressed and he carried this midrash together with the barrel of Kodesh, Tahar, it still remains Tahar. He shouldn't have done it in the first instance, but now that he did it and he was careful that they should not come into contact with one another, so then it remains Tahar. Okay. The next shtickle of Gemara, which we basically address, looks at the next section of our Mishnah. Says the case, this is the sixth case listed in the Mishnah. Elim hanigmorim b'tahara. You have vessels that were completed in a state of tahara, right? Nevertheless, we say you have to immerse it if you're going to use that vessel for kodesh, but you don't have to immerse it if you're going to use it for truma. Why? Because a vessel doesn't contract tuma until it's completed, and if the guy was careful to make sure that he was tahar from the point where he's going to now complete the vessel, then that vessel remains tahar until it contracts tuma in some other manner. But we say with regards to kodesh, you should still immerse it. Right? The Gemara, the gamrinuhu man. Who's the person that is completing the manufacturing process over here for this vessel? If you're going to say that it was a chaver who's careful about tahara, right? When he completes the making of it, lamahu tvila. So then why would you require any immersion for it, even if you're using kodesh? Surely the chaver is going to be careful. Ella, answers the Gemara, the gamrinhu amaretz. You're going to have to say that what? That it was the am haaretz that completed it. Now, nigmarin b'tahara harilahu. Would the Mishnah say that in such a case, this could be categorized as completing it in tahara? If this guy's an am haaretz and he's completing it, we would assume that it's being completed not in a state of tahara, because he's an am haaretz. So which one is it? So, and for the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Shila, Amar Rav Masna of Mashmul. So Rav Bar Shila says in the name of Rav Masna, in the name of Shmuel, that La'olam really the Gamrinu Chaver. Who's the guy completing it? The Mishnah is talking about a Chaver. So then why do we have this extra suspicion that causes us to make us immerse it again for kodesh? Mishum tzinoira da'amaretz, because of the possibility that it contracted from the spittle of an amaretz. What happened? What happens is because it's possible that the guy was showing off this vessel to an amaretz and talking to him while he was busy making it, and it could be that this amaretz by accident spat on the vessel, and once it becomes completed, then it contracts. It can contract tuma. Let's do this inside. The Nafal Amos. The Gemara wants to inquire now: when did this spittle fall? If you're going to say the spittle fell before the chaver completed it, so then halav manahu. It's not going to be a vessel, and so therefore it can't contract tuma. Even if the guy did spit on it, that's okay, because it wasn't a keli yet. Ella basid the gamre, but rather you're going to say that it has to be after he finished it. But since he's a chaver, mizrazabuhu, isn't he going to be careful with it? So therefore, we're trying to figure out how is this going to be a problem that would require us to immerse it again. So the Gemara answers, here's the scenario. The scenario is, he was before he completed. So therefore, he's still allowed the Amaretz to be around his vessel because he hadn't finished making it. But now, the Dilma, what we're concerned about is perhaps Be'inda the Gamre. Adayin Lechahi. It's possible that the Amaretz was speaking and somehow spat on the some of his spit. Saliva came onto the vessel, and now the Amaretz leaves and the chaver finishes making the vessel, but the spittle is still wet once it's been completed. And since it becomes, the spittle is still touching it once it's completed, it might become tar. Now, even it might become tummy. Now, even though this is a very far-fetched suspicion, nevertheless, when it comes to Kodesh, we're going to be extra careful. And we will stop over here. I wish you all a good Chodesh, and I wish you all a good Shabbos. And there's a question, feel free to ask.
Yes, quick question, Rabbi.
Sure.
From a practical standpoint, okay?
Yes.
You know, a household that has, typically it has multiple kelim. So keeping track of the Tumat Tahara status, or it is kind of daunting. It's almost suggesting that you have to treat everybody like a Am Haaretz because they can't keep track of it. It's you know, it's a human failing. If you're talking about Kodesh, that's really a challenge. So how did the people of the time deal with that?
So what you need to appreciate is that this was a very sore point of contention back in the day. When we talk about the Perushim, the Pharisees were called that because they were Parush. They separated themselves from everybody because, like you're saying, it is so daunting. They didn't want to come into contact with anybody. Lahavdil, when you look at the Christian scriptures, right? The story of the Good Samaritan, if you remember, right? What happened, right? What happened over there was that the people who saw this person and they weren't sure of his status of whether he was tar or tame, they kept away from him, and it was only the Good Samaritan that went to deal with this person. Despite the fact that they might contract impurity. But people looked down upon that often and saw this as certain level of arrogance. And it was done in order to be able to eat even their chulin, even their non-consecrated food, altar sakodesh, on the level of purity of kodesh. And you see to what lengths these Perushim went to be able to keep that. Now, just a historical point, not everybody that was called part of the Pharisaic sect kept all these laws. What it meant was that they followed the teachings of the Perushim. Okay, that's what it means. It's like, you have the Orthodox rabbis, right? And you have people who consider themselves to be Orthodox. It doesn't mean that they keep everything, but what it means is that they follow the rules of the Orthodox rabbis. And yeah, it was a very, very daunting thing to be able to stay away from any slight suspicion of something that could have touched something, that was an avatuma. Nevertheless, the rabbis, meaning the Perushim, they did that. They did that in order to be able to have that extra level of purity. And look, we're coming up to Parshas Kedoshim soon, and there's a mitzvah in the Torah, Kedoshim Tiyu, you should be holy. And they obviously felt that this would be in the spirit of this mitzvah of Kedoshim Tiyu, to try and keep everything that you come into contact with holy. So that's what they did, despite the fact you being correct that it was a very daunting task.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. That's helpful.
No, you're welcome. All right. A good Shabbos and a good
Good
Chodesh.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Whole